Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Hi, and welcome back to the Drama-Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. And today we're doing another episode on brain health. I love talking with founders of companies who do things with supporting mental health and functioning. Just it's something that I always like to ask them about their experiences. And today it is such a treat to share this episode with you. I am talking with Christal Wang, who is the creator of Shimmer, which is an AI-assisted ADHD live coaching platform that meets people where they are in life, helps them cope, stay accountable, and actually see results. So we talk all about Christal's experience. So she was 29 when she was diagnosed with ADHD. And she shares in this episode, it's kind of like a light went off for her with this diagnosis. And it really helped her really feel like herself more and to really, improve her work and personal life functioning and just to hear how she has turned her experience and used it to create something to help thousands of other people. It's just really incredible. So we talk a lot about, how to navigate something like ADHD. So of course we get into the symptoms and how you can find out if you have it. We talk about Shimmer and what it was like creating this program. We talk about some ADHD self-care essentials. So regardless of whether you personally have ADHD or there's someone in your life who does, or it's just something you're interested in learning more about, I know that you'll get a lot out of today's episode. So without further ado, let's get to it. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm stoked.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we could connect. I talk a lot about nutrition for cognitive function and lifestyle, how that plays into all of this. And, ADHD is something that I think is so much more common than people realize. But I feel like there's just not a great support services out there. So I was really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. The official number is about 5% of adults have ADHD, but we all know that's higher, especially for women, since less women are diagnosed.
Yeah, so I would love to hear about your own experience of finding out that you had ADHD and just what was that like for you?
This question's always hard for me to answer because I have like two parts of my discovery. I think there was this long, drawn out kind of suspicion and doubt cycle. I think that happens a lot for a woman or even for folks who are, it's called twice exceptional, but who are both gifted and have a disability. But it's because you're good at a lot of things. So you have an imposter syndrome that you don't want to take on this label, but then you have all the ADHD symptoms as well. So I think that was for years and years until what I call the second phase, which is my actual diagnosis. So that happened in 2022. And it wasn't as much of a surprise, the words, because by then I've been targeted by all the TikTok algorithms and all the Instagram algorithms. But I didn't expect that once I got the diagnosis, it was more like an unlifting or like an unveiling of who I actually was inside. I think there was lifting of a lot of I should do this or the shame or the identities of being a rebel kid that I had only got because of my ADHD. And so being able to kind of like unwrap all of those identities and uncovering who I am and allowing the more colorful version of myself that has the strengths of ADHD to have permission to be able to shine. So I think that actual diagnosis part was amazing. And also having the language and having the support and having the permission to get the support. But it followed a long period of that kind of shame and doubt cycle.
Yeah. And I think for people who aren't sensitive to that, having someone in their life with ADHD, like I know there are people that are close to me with ADHD, and I have not officially sought a diagnosis because I probably already know what it is. But I just it's just this question of like, well, how does it affect your day-to-day life if you find out you have it? And for you, I know you mentioned it sort of like unveiling who you really were. Like, did it affect sort of like how you showed up at work or, what you asked for in relationships? Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it was extremely positive for myself because I think that a lot of things, there's this concept of masking, which is essentially when you try to act more like what you perceive normal should be like. And that generally happens before you get your diagnosis and oftentimes after the diagnosis as well. But for me, I rapidly started unmasking, and friends who hadn't seen me for, let's say, a year during that period and they saw me afterwards, they're like, it's interesting because you're almost more ADHD now. And when I reflected on that comment, I was like, yeah, I think because I finally have permission to be myself and I am ADHD. And so the positive parts are also coming out. And the parts that are negative, instead of really just thinking that they're part of my identity, things like time management or getting distracted or inattention, instead of being like, well, Chris is inattentive, I'm now like, well, this is inattention. Here are my options now working with my coach that I'm able to now access to be able to bridge this specific symptom. So it's empowering. It's also a lot of work. And I would say the part that I didn't expect was that I became kind of more ADHD and more that colorful person that I think I had stopped being after I was really young.
So, and something that I find fascinating, and I feel like we do see this talked about a little bit more now, like there are men in my life with ADHD, there are women in my life with ADHD, and it can show up differently. And I'd love for you to share some of the things that maybe we should keep in mind, like about how it might be a little bit different from, and when I say women and when I say men, I mean like people assigned female at birth and those assigned male at birth. Like I know the language is, we're always trying to figure out the best way to say this, but what are some of the differences we should know about?
Yeah, definitely. I think first taking a step back, there's actually currently 3 presentations of ADHD. So there's hyperactive, which is traditionally attributed to young boys and bouncing off of walls, kind of being really talkative in class. I am actually hyperactive, so it's not always boys. So that's the first type. The second type is inattentive, and that's generally the daydreamer, the person who gets distracted, who gets lost in their own thoughts, generally very creative as well. And then there's the third type, which is what I am, and that's the combined type. It's when you have enough symptoms of both of the first and the second. And this is really important because most women, or way more than men, skew towards inattentive. And the reason why this is important is because when you have all of those symptoms inside your head and you're not bothering other folks, let's say you're a young girl sitting in class who's daydreaming, that teacher is not going to catch that you have ADHD because you're not bothering anyone. And so when you underperform in a certain area, it's not going to come off as, oh, this person has ADHD and I need to make an accommodation. It's going to come off as, well, she's really smart. She has great writing and she's not doing this. She didn't hand in her homework. So she must be lazy or she must not care. And so that kind of cycle that's happening with women or females or girls who have ADHD that is what's causing the late diagnosis. And when you have a late diagnosis, that's when things are being compounded. Because you didn't have the ADHD diagnosis, the probability that you're also going to have anxiety or depression or eating disorders or anything that's related to kind of self-esteem is going to be a lot higher. And so that's why it's very complicated. So when you ask women, which is later on in life, it is a lot more than just ADHD, and it stems from almost a very simple divergence when we're kids.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And, I know you touched on some really relevant points here, but generally speaking, like for someone who might not be at all familiar with what are some of the ways that, some of the common symptoms, especially like ones that might show up in like work life, and you mentioned performance, like what are some things that tend to show up for people?
Yeah, definitely. So it will be similar for men and women. It really just depends on which way you skew. But some of the common ones are definitely frequently losing things. The meme that we all see is that, oh, I lost my keys again. But it can get deeper than that. It could be paperwork. It could be your phone. And over time, you also start to kind of feel shame. Like when I ask someone, oh, where's my phone again? I still every single time feel like, oh my gosh, I'm asking this again. Like, why am I doing this? Running late is a big one. Time management is something that is really difficult for folks with ADHD, and time blindness specifically means that for me, if I don't set a lot of alarms throughout the day, I actually can't tell by intuition how long 15 minutes and how long 30 minutes is, the way that neurotypical folks can. Another thing is around the emotional regulation side. I think this part is talked about less. So everyone kind of hears about the hyperactivity or the forgetting things, but emotional regulation is actually also a symptom of ADHD, and specifically emotional dysregulation. So when something happens, especially I think one most prominent form is called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's when you perceive someone is rejecting you, and it could be real or perceived, and you feel that a lot deeper than a neurotypical person would. And so that can obviously play a big role in work and at home, and can end up spiraling to other things as well. Those are a couple kind of, I guess, most common ones, but there's a whole host, especially I think I've been thinking recently a lot in the workplace around prioritization, around getting things done. And really it all, like, if you were to lump the whole thing up, a good concept to look into is essentially executive functioning. Executive functioning is essentially your CEO of your brain that is able to help you coordinate, prioritize, get things done. And all of those things will be impactful for folks who have ADHD or neurodivergent.
Okay, so for somebody who's listening to this list and they're like, oh, check. Like, what are some, like, where would be, some examples of ways that they could, officially find out if they have ADHD?
Yeah. So the official way is to go to your psychiatrist or through your insurance. And I'm based in the US, so I'm speaking more around the US. I think depending on your country, you'll need to look a little bit into it. Unfortunately, a lot of the times the hardest part of this is when your primary care provider is not educated on what ADHD symptoms look like or what ADHD symptoms look like in women. And so I hear this a lot with our community, is that they need to convince whoever the first line of defense is that they have ADHD. And so because of that, if that applies to you, I generally recommend doing a whole ton of research on your own, doing self-tests. And that doesn't diagnose you, but it helps you have the right language to understand and to potentially print it out, because it can be nerve-wracking to go to your provider and have to advocate for yourself. So printing all of that out and writing down examples, bringing down report cards, and potentially even references from others if you need to take that to go advocate for yourself. And if that doesn't work, which it often doesn't, unfortunately for women, you may want to look into other providers who are fluent in neurodivergence and can be able to at least have a more informed conversation with you about if this may be something that's affecting you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And, it is just like, this could be like a secondary theme on this podcast. It's just all the different ways that women need to advocate for themselves.
Yes.
That's like in so many aspects of health. It is like things that and I know that there are tons and tons of exceptions, but there are so many things where if a woman goes to a provider with this issue, they're like, oh, you don't have that. Or no, that's, why don't that? It's like, wait a minute. Like, is the patient like voicing a complaint rather than the provider wanting to explore that with them and help them, seek the support and the resources that they need. They're like, oh, I don't think you have that. It's just it blows my mind.
Yeah, we hear so many stories. Anxiety is the one that most commonly gets cited as the reason when the doctor says, or whoever the provider says, oh no, I think it's actually anxiety, what you're experiencing, especially when the symptoms are more around inattention rather than hyperactivity, which is how kind of women skew. So yeah, it's really unfortunate, and we hear it pretty much every day. And that's why there's all these, this is plan A, then this is plan B, then this is plan C. You got to print all these things out, versus a lot of the men who I know and in my experience with ADHD have gotten that diagnosis when they were younger.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can relate. Like the people that I know who have the diagnosis, like the men were diagnosed very young, women not till their 20s and 30s. It's really interesting.
Yeah. And also many women who come to us through our wider community as well, they actually got diagnosed when usually their son, or it could be daughter, but most of the time when their son gets diagnosed and they start looking into it, they see the symptoms, and it's highly hereditary as well. So you start looking at the check boxes and you're checking your son's stuff off and you're like, wait a second, maybe me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for somebody who has ADHD or suspects they have it, and they really want to take some steps to refocus and just feel like they have a little more control over their attention, we'll say, or over their ADHD symptoms, like do you have any recommendations for first steps that they might take?
Yeah, so it's going to be very different per person, depending on really your starting point. And Actually, this is why obviously I'm biased, but I love coaching so much because it's not prescriptive and it's very empowering and personalized. But some general things that work for everyone, you're probably very steeped in this first point, but definitely it's behavioral medicine is making sure you get your food, you get your sleep. Your brain needs all the fuel it needs to begin working on anything, especially if you have ADHD. So that's something we always start with, especially when folks are coming in and starting with coaching and they're a little bit dysregulated to begin with. And then the second one is a little bit more holistic. And it's also what we start our coaching journeys working on is actually stopping and taking stock of what you want your life to actually be like. Because it can be very easy when you first get diagnosed to say, oh no, like I'm bad at time management. Like I need to fix time management. And you start pounding really hard on like the negative symptom that you don't even know why you're solving, which one, if you solve it, may not get you to a better life. And then two, you'll also feel really bad if you aren't able to solve it. So we always try to help folks look into the future to envision what it is that they actually want to look where they want to go, and then trying to figure out where those gaps are. And you can do this process on your own as well. And then I think the last piece is once you figure out the gap, it's really easy to just try to fix things. I think a lot of the times what our members and even myself didn't realize when you get diagnosed is that like ADHD also has all these strengths. And so you can also use those strengths, whichever ones are unique to you, to help you bring yourself closer to your finish line, because that's going to be also a lot more empowering and fun. And that process of discovering of your strengths is really important, is something that is often, in my opinion, overlooked when you take a purely medical approach, because the medical sphere, especially if you use medication or therapy or whatever, or go to your doctor, is generally about fixing and healing. So that's why I love dovetailing this more strengths-based, future-oriented approach that I have in coaching with the medical sphere, whether it is medication or other forms of treatment.
Yeah, amazing. So yeah, let's shift gears. I want to talk about Shimmer. So what inspired you to create this resource?
True ADHD style, actually, there's a lot of ADHD entrepreneurs, is that I just created what I couldn't find. I was looking for it. So I was diagnosed in 2022. And when I was, for a variety of reasons, mostly because of my Asian upbringing, I generally don't turn to medication as the first line of defense. So my first order of my mission when I got my diagnosis was, okay, well, what do I do about this? And is there a behavioral solution? And so when I stumbled upon coaching, it seemed too good to be true. I started looking into the science. I started looking into the results, and I immediately started doing consultations. And from there, it just went downhill. It was extremely expensive. I did over 15 consultations.
Wow.
I was in major decision paralysis, which is on the coaches, which is one of the main ADHD symptoms. And the whole process was very opaque. And when I finally arrived for a few of them on the other side of the finish line, I was greeted with $300, $400 per hour. And so I abandoned ship and I started interviewing coaches and interviewing now our members to try to figure out if this was something that other people were facing as well, and got a very strong resonating yes, and people sending me long essays on what they would want to see in a coaching solution. And so that's really how it originally got kicked off. And it was just a small group of experts and coaches and myself and a few members where we really just designed the first version of Shimmer together just for this group of there was about 20 or 30 of us who wanted ADHD coaching.
That's amazing. That is so cool. And I love that. I'm right there with you. Like so many things that I've done in my work have really been from not being able to find the resources that I needed for myself or my clients and patients. And to tell us a little bit about how Shimmer works.
Yeah. So from, I guess, very high level from a methodology standpoint, if you're not familiar with coaching, we facilitate coaching partnerships. So it's really about you and a coach getting together, and then you work collaboratively to, one, visualize the future. As I talked before, I think perspective memory, or otherwise known as the future orientation, is really difficult for people with ADHD. So we help you look into the future, chart what that would look like, and then figure out what the actual step-by-step map for yourself is going to be. And that's going to look different per person. And then in terms of how it actually works, so we are a cross-platform mobile and web app. And so you can however you like to be able to go through coaching. You essentially come on, there's a series of onboarding. And then after that, you're going to meet every single week with your coach. And everyone's journey looks different, but on a broad scale, it's going to be setting the future, running little experiments each week. So maybe this week you're working on your productivity at work and you're going to be testing out a few new strategies around calendaring or your to-do list. And then maybe you do that for a few weeks and you're happy with where you are in that area of your life. And then you move on to maybe with communication with your partner. You start identifying some challenges and then your coach will work together with you to figure out, maybe it is a different schedule you guys need to work together. Maybe it's certain communication skills that you need to practice or templates that you can practice. So it really just depends on the specific person and journey and goals that you have. And then in the app, if you also have, my favorite feature is the to-do list is linked to your coach. So when you finish a task, your coach can actually see that and they keep you accountable. So you'll actually get the things that you want to get done. And then there's some community features that are in the works and in the beginning stages. So we have body doubling. So if you want to come and work with other folks to be able to stay accountable and get things done, you can do that throughout the week. And then there's some other exciting community features that are coming soon, which are really important to us because one of the kind of main value propositions that folks get out of Shimmer is just finally feeling like they're not alone in their challenges and their goals, and that there's other folks that are wired similarly to them that are working on them together.
Amazing. And is there anything else that you would want people to know about what makes this tool different from some of the other ADHD resources out there?
Yeah. So I like to think that what we do is very holistic. So I think a lot of the times you'll find really great apps and tools out there that help you organize things, or you'll find really great, as I mentioned, coaches who might be too expensive to access, but aren't integrated with the tools. We really like to be a hub for learning development. And so we have that science-backed methodology and the expert coaches, but it's linked and integrated with all the tools that you need. So all the tools are being used in context of your coaching journey. And so that for us is really important because as a person with ADHD, it's already hard enough to keep track of all of these different systems and apps. So really having the guidance in the same world as all of your different tools and apps is definitely something that I've really appreciated and our members appreciate about Shimmer.
Amazing. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Now, I always like talking to my founders about like their own journey because I understand that when you are building a company and you're working this way, there's a lot of it's a lot on a human. And just what have you found to be some of your own ADHD or just general self-care essentials in this experience?
I think one of the biggest ones, which may feel a bit strange if you don't have this challenge, but it's related to my ADHD, is in the beginning when I started working with my ADHD coach, I was trying really hard to be a morning person because I thought, and I think many people think that to be successful, you wake up in the morning, you go to the gym at 5 a.m. And so I learned that many folks with ADHD actually have a late set circadian rhythm, which means your natural rhythm is to wake up late and sleep late. And so when I started to accept that and work with that and be able to move my meetings and also move my deep work blocks, like where I'm doing really strategic work, to the areas where I personally actually had the most energy, that was a game changer for me. And also move my physical activity, whether at the time it's going to a gym, at the times that work for me, and letting go of what I thought I should do. That was definitely one of my buckets of self-care kind of game changers. And then I think also there's been some that they're categorized as work, but they help me make space for self-care. Is definitely the two most important ones are body doubling and time blocking. And I think these are both really cool concepts. So body doubling is when you work in the presence of someone else. You don't have to be working on the same thing. And so sometimes I do that in person and sometimes I do that in our app. And I never do nothing during those body doubling sessions. There's no way the time will pass by without me doing anything because I already told that person what I'm going to do. And then the second piece is time blocking. So this was also introduced to me as a concept by my ADHD coach. And it's essentially, instead of writing a long list of things you want to get done that day and trying to power through them as fast as you can, time blocking, you put a block of time in your calendar with a predefined set of items that you want to get done. And so that way you aren't just trying to work the whole day with kind of no end in sight. And that way you have also for the ADHD kind of dopamine and reward system, you have this urgency. I only have 2 hours and I need to get done these 4 tasks. So those two kind of very practical tips or techniques have been really big game changers for me.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. I know, I run into this a lot with my clients that they think that in order to be well, they must be getting up at 5 a.m. to work out, doing a cold plunge, like meditating for 20 minutes, like, all and in the specific sequence. And to your point, like we are all unique. And I think whenever I see someone start to accept what works for them and really honor that and build their day around that, it is so incredible, the difference in their mental and physical well-being. So I appreciate you highlighting that, because I think in the entrepreneur space, there is this like, it's like the bro who, had his like specific biohacker routine,
Yes.
Looks a certain way. I left out the sauna. That's the piece I left out.
I live in LA, so it's all around me.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. But, and I think, thank you for mentioning the body doubling and time blocking. Time blocking has been a game changer for me in my own professional and honestly personal life. It's just like the mental like overwhelm of like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do all the things? It's like, yes, don't have to. This is the time that you're going to allot to do what you can. It's so helpful. So thank you for sharing that tool with us. Now, if people want to check out Shimmer and learn more, what's the best way for them to do that?
The most personal way to reach us is actually through our Instagram. I make reels there, so it's at shimmer.care. And conveniently, our website, which is the most official way to reach us, is also shimmer.care. So it's www.shimmer.care.
Beautiful. And we'll be sure to link to all that in the show notes. So, Chris, thank you so much for coming on today. I so appreciate you sharing your experience and your insight with us. And I just have one more question for you. And this is a question that I ask all my guests because there's so many different ways to interpret this. I don't think I've ever had 2 people say the same thing. But that question is, today, at this moment in time, because I know we're all constantly evolving, but what does healthy living mean to you?
So for me, it's very aligned with our methodology around acceptance commitment training in Shimmer, but it really is living a life that's aligned with your values or whatever you want to call it, whether it's your North Star, because I think that looks different for everyone. And I think sometimes when people hear the word healthy, they think of the gym or, as we were talking about, waking up early. But for me, it's really making sure that every single day I'm doing things that are aligned with my values. So for me, 2 really important values for me are adventure and learning. And so being a startup founder, I get to live those values every single day. And because of that, all my kind of healthy habits are easier to be able to fall in line.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. And all of you guys who are out there listening, on your devices, I don't know, maybe you're cooking dinner, you're doing the dishes, taking a walk, or I don't know, just enjoying a little you time. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you like what you hear, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. They do matter and help me continue to bring you great guests like Chris today. Chris, thank you for being a guest today.
No, thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.
All right. Well, all of you guys, thank you for being here with me. As always, have a wonderful day and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. We'll see you next time.